Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to address you today on the International Day of Peace and to welcome you to this UNESCO conference on countering online disinformation and hate speech to foster peace. Thank you to all speakers and participants following online and to the colleagues of the UNESCO office in Brussels who worked quite hard to make this conference a reality. The COVID-19 pandemic and other recent crises have shown the importance of access to information. Without effective access to information, there is a vacuum for disinformation, rumor, and conspiracy narratives to spread, and these narratives risk further fueling hate, fear, and radicalization, leading to violent extremism both online and offline. Unlike disinformation and hate speech, information and media freedom are key drivers for peace, inclusion, and effective governance. I'm glad that many of you are joining today's conversation to reflect on how to maximize the potential of digital technologies to enhance access to information. This is essential to build peace, while also countering hate speech and disinformation following a rights-based approach. Let me highlight that this mission lies at the very heart of UNESCO's mandate to build peace in the minds of men and women and to promote the free flow of ideas by word and image. As the custodian UN Agency of Sustainable Development Goal Indicator 16.10.2 on public access to information, UNESCO is working to ensure that access to information is truly universal, leaving no one behind. This is the underlying context in which the European Union and UNESCO have joined forces to address global issues of online content governance, to counter disinformation and hate speech, and to foster peace, democracy, and freedom of expression. I would like to thank the European Service for Foreign Policy Instruments in particular for its generous support to two major global projects, from which lessons learned will certainly nourish today's discussions. The first project, Coronavirus Facts, has been implemented since the very early stages of the pandemic. It has allowed for engaging with thousands of stakeholders, including from the media, fact-checking, and civil society organizations, across 9 countries and beyond at regional level, to respond to the spread of disinformation in the context of COVID-19 and build more informed and resilient societies in the face of future crises. The second project, Social Media for Peace, aims to foster a peaceful and innovative use of social media in 3 pilot countries through enhanced understanding of the impact of online harmful content and better knowledge of the effectiveness of tools to address it. These 2 projects have already yielded important results across the world, and they also serve as a laboratory for us to identify innovative and effective responses to today's and tomorrow's global challenges. Fundamental topics such as elections, climate change, or migrations are also negatively impacted by disinformation, hate speech, and conspiracy theories, and can thus benefit from the tools developed in a multi-stakeholder manner under the umbrella of these projects. Let me conclude by inviting you to join us next week on September 28th for the International Day for Universal Access to Information. This will be an important occasion to celebrate access to information and its relevance to peace and sustainable development, and as part of the fight against disinformation and hate speech. I thank you for your attention and wish you fruitful discussions.
A very good morning to all of you out there on this 21st September 2021. International Day of Peace, the 40th in its kind since it was established by the UN in 1989. My name is Annelies Beck. I'll be the host throughout today's conference. A warm welcome on my part as well. You just heard the opening remarks of Tawfiq Jelassi, the Assistant Director General for Communications and Information at UNESCO, talking, among others, about peace on this International Day of Peace. Now, in order for there to be peace, one of the requirements is that people understand each other, are able to better understand each other's needs, each other's ideas and opinions. And they have to want to listen to each other. However, and I'm sure I'm not telling you anything new, many conversations these days seem to have stalled, or even worse, have hardened into shouting matches, especially on social media platforms and in the digital sphere at large. However, those same social media platforms started out as agoras where ideas could be freely exchanged, where a better world could be forged on the basis of mutual understanding and on the basis of bottomless wells of information that would make everybody, all the participants, much wiser. Platforms for peace, as it were, was the idea. Alas, it turned out to be much more complicated. In today's conference, we will be discussing the role of social media platforms in fostering peace and access to information, but also in driving conflicts and disseminating disinformation. We will look at the responsibilities of platforms, public and politics, and we will discuss the potential and limitations of legal and non-legal frameworks to curb excess and online hate. And we will talk about the ways to fight disinformation in the light of strengthening democracy. And you, all of you out there, are very much invited to participate, and we ask you to send us our questions, or your questions rather, and to whom they are addressed, if you have someone specific in mind, via the Q&A in the Zoom appliance. And then I'll do my very best to take them on board during the panel sessions as much as possible. Also, this conference will be conducted in English, but French translation is provided. In a moment, I will introduce to you our high-level, and that is very literal, high-level panel, the distinguished panelists taking place. But let me first say that later today, we will look at the Social Media for Peace project. We will discuss the lessons learned of the project Coronavirus Facts. And in the third panel session this afternoon, we will talk about the importance of context and contextualization of online harmful content in order to foster peace. But now, first, allow me to introduce the topic of our opening discussion. It's called Social Media Content Governance and the Impact on Peace and Conflict Dynamics. Quite a phrase, there's a lot to unpack there, but we have very distinguished guests to have that discussion with. First and foremost, Věra Jourová, welcome to you, Vice President of the European Commission and responsible for values and transparency. Wairimu Nderitu, Special Advisor of the UN Secretary General on the prevention of genocide. Hilde Hardeman, also welcome to you, Director of the European Commission Service for Foreign Policy Instruments. Berger, Director for Freedom of Expression and Media Development at UNESCO, welcome to you too. Brittin is here too, President of Google Europe, Middle East and Africa. Welcome. And thank you for joining us too, Marcus Reinisch, Vice President of Public Policy at Facebook Europe, Middle East and Africa. We are delighted to have you on board and around the table, so to speak, be it virtually. Ms. Jourová, let me begin by addressing you with a very general, but I think maybe the most important question of what we're discussing here today, and that is social media platforms and the digital sphere in general, speaking at large. Do you consider them a threat, a real threat to peace and democracy in the EU? And if so, how does that work? can you, this is a classic here, I have to intervene, you have to unmute.
Yes, this is classical. Look, and I managed to say the most important thing by thanking you for inviting me. so again, thank you. I will definitely work with the results of your discussions, which will be running today under your event, because we are still working on hopefully meaningful rules for online sphere in the Commission. Well, as every good thing, and we saw it many times in history, this is nothing new. As every good thing, it can be abused by bad people, bad actors for bad interests. Social media can be used for fantastic purposes of organizing charity or crowdfunding to help somebody, but also, of course, we saw the attack on the Capitol Hill or tragic events in Myanmar, which was fueled by online or social media conversations. So no doubt that both good and bad are true. At the same time, after working several years in this field, I still have a feeling that the real life is better than what we see online. And that it's our duty to address the issues. In my view, there is the issue of anonymity, because the people should not face to face say horrible things to each other. And the lack of rules, the jungle, the space which has been created without any rules. Well, I think that high time that we deliver the rules, or we develop the meaningful legal framework for the online space. But of course, the laws, the rules cannot do the magic. In our view, it requires an all of society approach, because there are responsibilities and roles for online platform, but also advertising industry, media publishers, independent national regulators, research community, civil society, political actors, educational layer, because we need to adapt to the new situation. I think we shouldn't stop lamenting that the social media are delivering something very dangerous and harmful, but we should be more resilient against these new risks, and this is where the education could say a word. I don't want to keep too much of the time. Maybe later, if I am given the opportunity, I will explain what the EU is doing and what we want to do, especially on that side of rules making. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we will definitely get back to you on that, because there's a lot you said, and the legal frameworks and desirability of that or not is something we will get into for sure. But for now, let's stay with this idea of social media platforms and whether it is or not a threat to peace and stability. And I want to bring in Mrs. Nderitu. Thank you for joining us, because you are way ahead of us. It's very late or early, depending on how you see it where you are. How do you look upon the relationship between the online space and real life, offline life, so to say? Is there evidence of a spillover to your knowledge? And also, how much of a priority is the fight against online hate speech in relation to what's going on in real life, in offline life, according to you?
Thank you very much for having me today. And I would say, yes, it's very early. It's 4 a.m. in New York. I'm in New York. And I had to get up for this conference because it's extremely important. My office, the Office of the Prevention of Genocide, is the United Nations focal point for hate speech. So any conversation on hate speech is extremely important to us. And to answer your question, I would say that yes, human beings are made for connection. Like there is nothing like the power of human connection. And social media provides that connection in ways that are both negative and positive. And I would like to say that this growing phenomenon that we've seen of hate speech is largely because social media platforms have amplified it, but we know that it was always there. We know, for instance, that every genocide and even the Holocaust was preceded by hate speech, even in the absence of social media. So, but I would say that hate speech is proliferating online right now with devastating impacts. And my office received several complaints. Too many times we have minority groups or those who are perceived to be different being the targets and victims of hate speech. And they are always scapegoated for challenges faced by communities or countries, especially economic challenges. And we've seen the situation further compounded by the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And my office has actually issued an advisory on hate speech during the pandemic. And so this then has become this unprecedented crisis from a health and human rights perspective. And we've noted too that crises such as the pandemic, a disease outbreak such as the pandemic creates anxiety and fear, and therefore is the key ingredient for hate to thrive. So then hate speech then of course has of course all these very serious short and long-term implications, because those who are targeted by hate speech become more vulnerable to violence. They become more exposed to increased exclusion. They become more isolated. They become more stigmatized. And hate speech actually builds up into a space where members of minorities are inhibited from accessing vital services, including medical care. They are afraid. And it then works against the whole country, including those who are the propagators and those on the receiving end, because it exacerbates all these underlying social and economic inequalities and aggravates drivers of violence and undermines social cohesion. So I'd like to stop there and just say, like, really in its most serious form, hate speech can trigger social unrest and conflict and may actually even be an indicator of the risk of atrocity crimes, as I have said. And when I say atrocity crimes, I mean genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that's a very clear point of view. It can have very far-reaching and devastating consequences, hate speech online. But Mrs. Hardeman, I want to come to you. Seeing online platforms as a tool for foreign policy, can it also be flipped? Can it be a tool for good, for peace building? Or is it, in terms of foreign policy, mostly and in essence, a fight against online speech, hate speech? How do you see that?
Thank you very much, first of all, for giving me the opportunity to speak on this panel and to meet. Well, I think that Vice President Jourová and USG Wairimu have already very well explained how such tools can be used to fuel conflict, to fuel tensions. And as they both have said, this is not something new. It's as old as mankind. It's just that we are getting ever better and faster tools to spread this type of information. And so it becomes more difficult to address it. But as you suggested, and in our daily work, we have some very positive examples as well. Platforms, social media can be used to do a lot of bad things, and we witness that, but they can of course also be used as a tool for positive developments, to help support dialogue, to help support peace building efforts, to help spread good information rather than bad information. There were already examples given, we all know them, of situations where social media platforms have contributed to tension, to conflict, to war, have led to death. But in our actions as the European Commission Service for Foreign Policy Instruments, We can also give you several examples where working with partners across the globe, with UNESCO, with indeed United Nations, with the platforms themselves, where we have contributed to dialogue. And I give you a number of examples. The COVID situation has led to a lot of disinformation. But we have also been able to use platforms and social media to make sure that correct information is brought to as many people as possible, that awareness about facts that are not correct has been raised with people by setting up fact-checking and disinformation debunking networks. We have done so, for instance, together with UNESCO in Latin America, with a lot of positive results in a program called Chequeado. In another context, in Nigeria, we have been using platforms, social media, to help youth actors spread messages for peace, once again with positive results. In Ukraine, another example where there is a lot of disinformation being used to fuel tensions. We have worked with journalists, with schools, with universities to raise awareness, both among the media and among the audience. How do you recognize disinformation? How can you make the difference? So I would say, like most things that we know that can be used both for negative outcomes and for positive outcomes, where there is room for disinformation and narratives of hate, there is also room for information and narratives of coexistence and peace. So there is nothing inherently bad about the new reality. It's all about the way in which we use that reality. And governance is crucial, as the Vice President has said. Awareness raising is crucial. Fact-checking, debunking is essential. And to achieve positive results, we need to work together with a whole range of different actors, but all for the same goal, and that is correct information and peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Governance, we'll come to that in a moment. But talking about debunking, about countering online hate, brings me to Mr. Berger, because of course, there's a good side and a bad side to almost everything, Mr. Berger, but is it fair to say that with online content there is a very specific difficulty, and that is that if you counter online hate speech or speech deemed as such, you might start a discussion about the freedom of speech. Who gets to decide what is online hate speech? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, happy Peace Day to everybody, and I want to say that in preparation for this, I was thinking of some catchy tweets which could condense some thinking on this, but I ended up writing a poem. So here I go, which I hope answers your question, Annelies. The pandemic calls for there to be a living eulogy for technology. It's helped so much, we've kept in touch, we've shopped and learnt and kept on track, and tech will help us to bounce back. But we can't avoid apologies for the abuse of ICTs, for the maskless doing anti-vax by exploiting algorithmic hacks, for the incitement in Myanmar, which was allowed to go much too far, for putting democracy in the face of dangers with the platforms lacking ranges. Today, we thank the world's free press for reporting on a toxic mess, for flagging disinfo and hate online, showing us that things aren't fine. Media need more resources, they need more courses, and safety to be at their best. Well, they're passing the test, but how about the rest? The platforms are lagging, although they like bragging. From them, we need news, not inflammatory views. We want access to facts, not harmful speech acts. But something's come off at the wheels. we're still far from humanity's ideals. Disinfo depends on fabrication. Hatred works with manipulation. Online, they flourish in parts and they fuse as sweethearts. So that digital lies hurt social ties while hostility hits in our heart. And then things fall apart. It sure isn't fun, it must be undone. So let's work with big tech for a root and branch check. We need to get the net reset. For if we don't, and if we won't, what will we see in 2023? UNESCO states will say, enough of this hate. We can't sit and wait until it's too late. The risk that they'll take is to over-regulate all of the content that goes through the gate. Despots will jump on that bus, claim to be part of us, and press freedom they'll violate. So we need a new frame. Transparency has to be the game. UNESCO is seeking the words to develop accords, to put digital under the light, to give owners and abusers a fright by lifting the cover of night. So let cooperation be crafted and good examples drafted. Let us draw our joint maps that avoid all the traps. For investment in this world's big tent, more money must be spent, even if profits take a dent. Our goal, information as a public good, a cause that everybody should strive in order to stay alive. Let's protect dignity, equality, and peace, keeping free expression as part of the grease, so that the cyber machines can become the means towards sustainable development goals. Isn't it this for which the bell tolls?
Mr. Berger, speechless now, which is, of course, not the point of today's conference. Thank you very much for that multi-layered poem, and thank you for all you brought to the table there. Mr. Reinisch, I'm going to field this ball in your direction, because from where I was standing, this sounded like a bittersweet declaration of love to the technology companies. How did it come across for you?
Well, first, thank you, Annelies, for having me, and I'm really grateful to be supporting this important initiative. Maybe not as poetic as Guy, but an important initiative that is absolutely in line with the values of Facebook. And I really strongly believe that a social media platform, specifically like Facebook, has not just a responsibility, but actually has to make it its commitment to be a force for peace and for human rights. So yes, I think that the ball is with us, and we have responsibilities here. And Annelies, you explained this quite well. This has been a quite bumpy journey for all of us, not just for the platforms. And I think it came out really, really well in Guy's poem as well. And it has a journey with ups and downs. And, you know, we talked about Myanmar. We need to just think back to 2011, to the Arab Spring, when there was the perception that, you know, our platform is the main conduit to bring human rights, to bring democracy. And then you fast forward to 2017, to Myanmar, to the violence that happened, to the Rohingyas, to the abuse of our platforms, to incite violence, cause deaths of thousands, of, you know, widespread sexual violence. We had the 700,000 Rohingyas having to flee to neighboring Bangladesh. So, you know, this is an up and down, and the journey didn't end. You know, after that, we had to get our act together. We had to really significantly change our processes, our products, our policies. And then as a result, you looked earlier to 2021, when there was the military coup in Myanmar, and then it was much, much easier for us and to be much quicker in taking down the Burmese army off the platform, to deal with inciting hate and speech on the platform much, much quicker. So it's up and down, it's a learning process, it's a joint learning process between private companies, between the regulators, between the civil society. Let's not make a mistake, the challenge is still enormous. You know, we have a scale challenge. Just on Facebook, there are 1.7 billion daily users who upload and share billions of items of content on the platform. This is a challenge for not just the human reviewers. It's a challenge for even the automated moderation systems. Mm-hmm. And then we have a challenge of complexity, because I think Guy and others mentioned this as well. We really actually struggle with the definition. What is actually hate speech? We have a definition, but even the UN admits there isn't a stable definition of hate speech that is not disputed and controversial. So I think we are completely aware as a social media platform that we have a responsibility on the one side to protect freedom of speech, and on the other side to prevent speech that causes offline harm and causes discrimination and other forms of harm. While we're dealing quite often with governments who introduce regulation that are not necessarily based on the principle of human rights. So I think this is a tension that we have to deal with all the time. That's sort of the staples. But the summary of it is we still have our work cut out and a lot to do in this field.
Yeah, your work cut out indeed. Just one follow-up question briefly. The idea of critics of social media platforms and giants like Facebook and Google in general is that business interests do not correspond always with these ideals that you put forward and that you say is what your mission really is. So you do confirm that Facebook puts the money where the mouth is?
Well, there's an enormous investment that goes into keeping the platform safe and protect integrity of the platform. And we're talking about billions and billions that we spend every year. We're having about 35,000 people who sort of real people who moderate content, who protect the safety. So that's an enormous investment. And just to go into the incentive structure, I mean, it's not a secret. It's the same for Matt and us. We are an advertisement platform to a large extent, and we do not have advertisers that want to have their content next to inciting content. So I don't see where the conflict is from the business angle and from the ambition and from the clear commitment to keep the platform safe from hate speech and from violence and offline violence.
Okay, thank you for that. And you mentioned Mr. Brittin. Welcome to you too, Mr. Brittin. This call for more responsibility from the tech platforms, tech companies. Do you feel, yes, we need to step up, we want to step up? Or do you say, well, we're merely a conduit for information, we don't control what passes through? What's your opinion?
Well, thank you, Annelies. I think digital tools offer so much to so many people, and we absolutely have an opportunity to put them to work in the service of peace ever more every day. We also have an enormous responsibility between ourselves and everyone on this call to do more, and I'll talk a bit about our experience on that, because we're not just starting today, right? It's been a long journey as we've all got to use these tools. I can't offer a poem, but I can offer some promise from Google Translate. You said at the beginning in your introduction, we must understand and listen. Google Translate translates 150 billion words a day in at least as many languages. And the three most common phrases are, how are you, thank you, and I love you. And I do think that that is a nice illustration of how technology has an overwhelming role to play in peace and understanding. The promise of technology is clear. Half the planet is online and the other half is coming very soon. And at Google, it's all about access to information. We're not principally social media, we're about access to information at the heart of our company. The information you want, the answers you need, but the accuracy that you deserve. And we were one of the signatories to the contract for the web. Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the web, put together a contract for the web and encourage countries, companies and communities to come together. And I think that's one of the things I really applaud UNESCO and the EU for doing, bringing us together. The contract for the web encourages us to build technology that brings out the best in humanity and that challenges the worst. And I think that's something that helps me get up out of bed every day, trying to make sure that we do exactly that. And in the context of how we work together as organizations, I really want to commend the Vice President. I sat in a room with her many years ago at the first EU Internet Forum, where we brought together all of the member states of the EU, plus the technology players, to look at how can we fight hate speech, in particular violent extremism, at that first conference. and a combination of the phrase that Guy used so beautifully, lifting the cover of the night, being transparent about the scale of these things. Secondly, you do not want technology companies being the decision maker of what should be allowed. That is the role of governments and communities. So one of the things that has come from that first conference is we work with 150 different NGOs and expert organizations to help define, what is harmful content. The commissioner herself, vice president herself as a commissioner, drafted the code of practice, which we signed up to on misinformation and hate speech. And I think you can see how a combination of new technologies, we share technologies to help identify these kinds of harmful content with other technology platforms, including Facebook, so that if something is violating these policies or laws, it can be identified and not even seen by a single human. So those are some of the ways I think that the governance can work. And I can talk more if we have time about the way we think about some of these things at Google, vital for these communities to work together. I think the other thing we haven't talked much about, yes, we need to reduce and remove harmful content. In the COVID crisis, we've removed over 1 million videos from YouTube, which we operate, which were misinformation on COVID. But we also need to raise and reward quality content, and that's a vital part of this as well. So Guy and other journalists work incredibly hard to get correct stories out there. We need to make sure those have access, and that's one of the ways which Google Search most plays into this. 24 billion times a month we send somebody who searches for a news item to one of 80,000 publishers who are who they say they are, who employ journalists. We do fact checking through international bodies who are independent. 2.4 billion times last year people saw fact check search results as a result of that. And then we also have to reward that content, right? Follow the money. We need to stop misinformation making any money. We also need to make sure that the quality content, which costs to produce, makes money, and we pay out billions each year to genuine publishers to do that, and are investing more and more in that. So we can go on, but I think we have to make sure that we put technology to work in the service of peace and understanding. It's a huge force for good. We also need to fight the bad actors, and that will never end because innovation is across all forms of society. So I commend the UNESCO and EU efforts on this. We're very proud to be a part of them. Yes, we've made some progress. Yes, we always have more to do.
Thank you very much for that. And that brings me to this chapter on legislation and rules and who gets to decide them and devise them. Mrs. Jourová, let me come to you. Mr. Brittin just mentioned transparency and the role of politicians and maybe also civil society in deciding what's allowed or not allowed, let me use that word, or acceptable, not acceptable. Is it politics' role to decide on that? And also, if I may add a second question, there was this EU code of conduct, but that was sort of allowing companies to self-regulate more or less and then just taking stock of how well they were doing or not. Whereas now there is a move to more impactful regulation with the DSA and DMA, for example. So didn't it work out, the self-regulatory framework, or what is the reason behind that?
Yeah, thank you very much. How much time do we have?
Well, I can give you 2-3 minutes.
I will try to do it. Well, I have two mantras. So one, as a politician, work on that, and it's what you ask about, whether the politicians to push their noses into that. So two mantras. What is illegal offline has to be dealt with as illegal online as well. Yeah, this is no parallel world without the rules, and the criminal law is here, and the definition of hate speech, which is a criminal act, is in all the member states. Yeah? So we just want, under the Code of Conduct Against Hate Speech, which is a gentleman's agreement, we want the platforms to detect this crime and to remove it, work with the law enforcement authorities and so on. The second mantra is there must not be any single authorized arbiter of the truth. It must not be me. It would make me the most influential person in the world. Yeah, and I was grown up in a totalitarian regime. the Minister of Information was the most influential man in that regime. So please, no arbiter of the truth. It cannot be me. It cannot be Mr. Zuckerberg. It cannot be the General Secretary of UNESCO, whoever else. So these are two main rules. And now we needed to fight against something very strong several years ago when we saw the negative impact. Hatred and manipulation. And when you have to combat something very strong, you have to realize really who is the enemy and who is somebody who can help you. And that's why we chose for cooperation with the platforms. So that's why I had so many contacts with Matt Brittin and his colleagues and with Facebook's managers and so on, because we developed two, if you allow me, or three gentlemen agreements, code of conduct against hate speech, code of practice against disinformation, and the third was the agreement to do more against the dangerous products sold online. And this proved to be useful, but not sufficient. And that's why we had to deliver the legislation. And also because not all the online actors are in the code or under code. Yeah, there are many new actors, and we simply had to come with something which will deliver the necessary legal certainty and to have all on board. And that's why we came with Digital Services Act, where that mantra, what is illegal offline must be illegal online is fully applied. We call on more responsibility and transparency. We will introduce two pieces of legislation still against hate speech online, which will be new Eurocrime against hate speech online, and the second, the directive against gender-based violence, which will be, there will be a lot about online violence. And on the other side, we are now working together with the platforms, but also with the advertising industry and NGOs on upgraded code of practice against disinformation. And here comes the second mantra: no one to be the arbiter of the truth. That's why in the code, we want to do exactly what Matt Brittin described, and also Markus Reinisch, to cut the bad guys of the money. That's why we need the advertising industry with us. We need to have many more fact checkers employed and paid by the platforms to do the fact checking. We need strong media, because we need somebody to get the facts right in this society. That's the role for independent professional media. And that's why we had the copyright directive already adopted in the past. So simply, gentlemen agreements are over. We need meaningful rules, not to overshoot, which is sometimes a little bit European Union hobby. But on this one, we really want the digital area to flourish and to develop. That's why we are very careful about not to come with far-reaching rules, which will not be possible to enforce anyway. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So we are also aware of that. I know I speak too long, but I wanted to cover the whole range of the matters. And this illegal factor, which is connected with hate speech, and illegal but harmful, which is connected with disinformation, and our dual approach. I just wanted to explain this one, because the primary principle we need to protect in Europe is the freedom of speech. Okay. And this is what I also have to emphasize.
That was
Thank you.
Very clear. Thank you very much for that. And gentlemen, Mr. Reinisch, Mr. Brittin, I will get back to you and let you react to that in a moment. But Ms. Hardeman, I just wondered, from your point of view, this is very European legislation and ideas about that. from your point of view, is this something that can be applied at some point in the future worldwide and globally, or from your experience, is the context so locally specific that it cannot just be applied blanket-wise worldwide, even if it works very well within the European Union, all these rules?
Thank you very much. Well, I think Vice President Jourová has explained very well what are the key elements. I'm not sure that I would make any pronouncements about blanket-wide and worldwide, but I think that yes, these principles are valid everywhere, and actually in our day-to-day work together with our partners, UNESCO, but also with the platforms, we are applying a similar approach in conflict-affected regions. Usually in these regions, you do not have strong institutions. It's very, very difficult to have the type of transparency, accountability that you are looking for. But it is possible to work on that, and we are trying to do that together. As it has been said, we don't want a Ministry of Truth. That's absolutely anathema. So you need to reach out to the authorities, but also to civil society, to the media, to journalists, to education, and to the platforms to try and create a common awareness, common understanding, and a common work in dealing with content, trying to make all these players find what is in it for them, you know, and make them work together. So we are now setting up a new project with UNESCO and with a number of platforms. The Social Media for Peace project that was already introduced when the panel started. We will be working in 3 pilot countries, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Indonesia, and Kenya, to set up so-called media councils, social media councils, in which we will bring together academics, civil society organizations, journalists that will act as sounding boards, both to authorities and to online platforms, and that will work together with them to try and find appropriate solutions to tackle harmful content in a transparent and accountable way. And I can say that in the COVID context, we have already worked really successfully in a number of countries doing exactly that. I gave you already the example of Latin America, where we brought together all these players, but also in Iraq, you'll believe it or not, in Iraq we have worked very positively during the COVID crisis on accountability of platforms. So yes, I think it's possible, and yes, we should work together to try and spread this awareness and this approach much wider than only in the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And speaking of social media for peace, there's another panel session later today, exactly, and specifically on that. So we'll go into the cases, some of them you mentioned already, like Iraq, for example. Gentlemen, I haven't forgotten, Mr. Brittin, Mr. Reinisch, I'm still coming to you, but I'm making a small detour via Mrs. Nderitu, because there is also a UN plan of action on hate speech, originated in May 2019. Can you explain how it relates to all the ideas and codes of conduct that exist within European context? Is it a plan along the same lines, or what is the idea behind that UN plan of action on hate speech, please?
Thank you very much. You know, the UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech was launched in 2019, as you say, and it was launched because in recognition that tackling this phenomenon of hate speech is not something that the UN can do on its own. But it's something that requires concerted efforts and partnership with other relevant stakeholders. So in terms of this conversation that we are having right now, I would say that one of the key components of the UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, and it's available on our website, is that it acknowledges tech and social media companies as key partners to address and counter hate speech. And so the tech and media companies will tell you, like, for example, here in New York, that we meet on a regular basis. And we talk about some of the issues that have been raised that are relevant, not just within where we are, but all over the world, including in Europe. And some of the discussions center around the definition. I think somebody before me said that there isn't one definition of hate speech, and it's true. We have a UN definition of hate speech, but hate speech is defined contextually in different ways around the world. And the other thing that we discuss a lot with the tech and social media companies is content moderation. It's one of our biggest challenges, I would say. And social media companies also say that they face a lot of challenges on content moderation and trying to address hate speech on their platforms. And really because there are billions of messages being posted daily in thousands of different languages and dialects, but also because human content moderation is not always possible. And that in those cases, it's always a very complex undertaking, including from a psychological point of view.
Because the battery is weak.
I think someone else just interfered, but do carry on, please.
Okay. So I would say that my office has been addressing issues related to, within the UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, related to content moderation of online hate speech. And we've organized 2 roundtables with tech and social media companies. And the 2 roundtables really are a culmination of many discussions. And finally, we agreed on ways in which we can work together with the tech and social media companies to implement the UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech. And so we have a series of recommendations put together by our office and tech and social media companies. And the recommendations are on enhancing the transparency of the operation of their automated systems for content moderation and curation, and also on expanding online content moderation in languages in which their platforms are available, including local languages. And of course, we often speak about how difficult it is to moderate content when it's in languages that are not translated, are not translatable by social media. And then we've also have recommendations on how to put in place appropriate procedures to prevent trauma in staff members caused by content moderation or radicalization through exposure to hateful rhetoric. And I must say that one is me who personally pushes that, because I previously worked in an organization in a commission in which we were tasked to ensure the implementation of legislation on hate speech in my home country. And it was very traumatizing to keep watching all these hate clips, day in, day out, and ascertain what is hate and what is not. So this is something that I keep pushing for. Who takes care of the tech and social media companies, the people who have to go through all this hate and determine whether it's hate or not. And also, we also have recommendations on how to establish independent and transparent oversight mechanisms so that we ensure, again, that content moderation policies and practices are compliant with international human rights standards. We have recommendations on how to establish independent and transparent oversight mechanisms to ensure that these content moderation policies and practices are compliant with international human rights standards. And we also have recommendations on how to set up independent governance models entrusted with the review of content moderation. So we cooperate quite a lot with tech and social media companies to implement these recommendations, and there is a lot of work that is ongoing. Thank you.
A lot of work ongoing, and I can sense that cooperation is really of the essence. Mr. Reinisch, coming back to you, all this talk of legal frameworks, legislation, codes of conduct, does it feel like a straitjacket your company is being put in, or is it helpful in any way to you to then moderate and curb online hate speech, for example, one of the elements in this discussion?
Yeah, I would go a bit further. I don't think it's just helpful. I think it is absolutely necessary to have a framework of rules set on how to deal with this issue. We have our role, and Matt was very clear before what social media companies do and have to do, because we are at the front line. We're at the cold front of dealing with this. But when it comes to setting the rules, that is a balance of very, very sensitive societal values of freedom of speech, of privacy, of safety, of competition. And that is not something that a private company should do. That's not something that Mark Zuckerberg should do. It's not something I should do. This is the job of democratically elected representatives. And I mentioned before is that there are governments out there that sort of introduce regulation that are not based on principles of human rights. That is correct. That's a big challenge for all of us. But therefore, it is doubly important that if we have countries, if we have institutions, if we have regions like Europe that are basing their decisions on the right values, on freedom of speech, on privacy, and so on, that we really double down and support that and support the frameworks that come there. And therefore, and Vice President Jourová spoke about this, there are many instruments, some of them, growing from the codes, going to the DSA, to the Digital Service Act, to the EDAP, the European Democracy Action Plan. These are all very commendable and important tools to, on the one side, bring the decision power back to the people, to the institutions that are made for this. And secondly, to actually give clarity to us, to give certainty, because it is very difficult to work in an environment where, suggestions are shouted from the one side and the other, and have a consistent approach to dealing with hate, dealing with misinformation, dealing with misinformation. So this is not just helpful, it's necessary for us and it's necessary for society.
Mm-hmm. And what with transparency, it's been mentioned here a couple of times already. With regard to Facebook, there was a series of critical articles in Wall Street Journal saying there's not that much transparency as can be expected or as being alleged by the company itself. Do you feel that's fair? That's something that's being developed, this transparency, or is it part of the culture of the company to be a bit apprehensive and to be rather closed?
Yeah, I wouldn't recognize that would be the nature or the DNA of the culture to be closed. I think transparency is one of the key principles of, and has to be principles of regulation. That's how you deal with the situation, by enshrining levels of transparency. And that is the case if you do look through, again, the DSA and the ETAP. That's sitting at the core of it, to create more transparency. And we very much support it. And you were referring to the Wall Street Journal articles. Look, I mean, I would say there has been maybe a slightly also intransparent way of picking certain pieces of information and portraying it in a way that create this perception, because it is completely normal that companies like ours conduct research and that we take this very seriously internally, and we take this forward, and we're not hiding that away. But as I said, there are certain elements that have been picked and chosen out of this that make us appear in a different light.
Okay, thank you very much for reacting to that. Mr. Brittin, then, to you. You mentioned earlier YouTube is a source of information for millions and millions of people, and millions of youngsters, for example, have YouTube as their only source of information. How much are you into developing AI, artificial intelligence, for them to see real information, properly sourced information and journalistically sound information, rather than clickbait or things that are very inciting emotions rather than truthful information?
Well, I have to say I don't recognise the premise of your question, in that I don't think any young person only gets their information from YouTube, right? Everybody who is online has an access to an enormous array of information, as we've talked about, and that's one of the roles that Google search plays. If I think about something like YouTube, it's an overwhelming source of how to do things. It's not really a social media platform. You go there because you want to look at a piece of video, and there's an awful lot of content that is used every day. I think 1 billion people a day learn how to do something, whether it's play the guitar, solve a simultaneous equation, fix their washing machine, from videos. But you're absolutely right. I talked about the way in which we think about content: raise and reward quality content, reduce and remove content that's harmful or dangerous, and of course remove illegal content. And that's the way we try to play. What we've seen over recent years is many more people from many more cultures uploading and creating content. I think that's something that's really important. But I just want to go back to the essence of this conversation, which is it's time to update the rules and the laws. And I think the EU has shown leadership in a number of areas of online. So GDPR, how we think about privacy, was set by the EU. Many countries follow those similar principles. We actually built our safety engineering center in Munich in Germany, where we build the Google account tools built by Germans for everyone around the world. We built a safety engineering center in Dublin we launched earlier this year, which is about content moderation and policy, and that operates across countries. And it's great to hear Alice talking on the UN's behalf. Clearly, we need global forums as well to discuss these things. So absolutely, let's update the laws, because we're running on a 20-year-old rule book. Nobody could have envisaged even that we could do something like this conversation today 20 years ago. So we have to update the rules, and things like the Digital Services Act are really important. But we also need to have ongoing regulatory dialogue, because these challenges develop and evolve incredibly fast. And I think we talked about some of the ways which we can do that. I think the UN Global Internet Forum for Counterterrorism is a good example of some of those things in place. But also we have to recognize that each country has cultural, social and political differences about their rules and laws as well, and that adds complexity. And then the final point I'd make is, you hear from Google a lot, you hear from Facebook a lot because of the reach and popularity of our platforms, but there are many new platforms and tools being built every day. We want those platforms and tools to thrive, right? We want more European and more African innovators to be able to build technologies, and so they need rules that operate well, but we also need ways of making them safe. So it's a really important effort and moment. And I just go back, on International Peace Day, half the planet's connected. That's a huge opportunity for understanding, listening and learning from each other. It's overwhelmingly positive. The other half of the planet is coming in the next 5 years. Mm-hmm. And so we need to build a world where the benefits of that technology can be enjoyed by everyone, and the challenges of that technology is something that we work together to fight every day. Because,
if I may paraphrase you, reach does come with responsibility as well. And that's what we're doing here in this virtual roundtable, let's say, talk about the ways in which we can, or you rather, can work together to achieve that. Mr. Berger, let me, we're almost finalizing this discussion, come to you for an almost final word, because we've been talking about half the world being online, half the other half not yet, but there's also the divide within the minds and between people. In the beginning I mentioned this entrenched kind of polarization. In spite of all the good intentions that were mentioned here, all the platforms and the discussing together and the working on regulations and codes of conduct, is it possible at all to reach people across this chasm of conflicting ideas, of polarization, do you believe?
Yes. Well, let me respond by saying that these the EU rules that are in the pipeline. They are minimum standards, of course, and that doesn't then mean that the companies only do the minimum. Because the rules will say what content should be taken down, or what should not be allowed, or should be otherwise treated in a downgraded way. But there's a lot of questions still then about what kinds of content gets elevated. And so this is not in the realm of the rules. This is in the realm of decisions by the companies. And these decisions, they're partially moderation decisions, but they're also curation decisions. And indeed, I think it's correct to say that companies don't want to be associated with hatred and disinformation because advertisers don't like it. At the same time, it seems from the outside that the algorithms end up in exactly this situation, so that you have a tension between what the companies would like to do and those incentives, and the way that the attention-seeking model is creating different effects. And for us, as I think society and stakeholders and the companies, to wrestle with these issues of moderation, curation, and how does that feed into polarization or into peace, we really need more transparency. And so, for example, in these UNESCO principles, transparency principle number 6 is that companies should be transparent about processes that they've put in place to identify, remove, or reduce the impact of disinformation and hate speech, including pre- and post-publication measures, and how these processes respect the free exchange of ideas and opinions. So if we can get that transparency, it will really help everybody understand more and be more convinced about what is actually happening to try and reduce the level of polarization and to promote peace, given that the role of the companies does seem to be contradictory at the moment, despite some of the best intentions.
Thank you for that. Mrs. Jourová, as a last point, a thought to end on, from what you've heard today, cause for hope or concern? What's your conclusion at this point during the conference?
Yeah, I am always optimistic, and sometimes optimists are just those who lack information. But I think I have a lot of it, and we have to continue. We have to introduce the rules. We have to enforce them. But at the same time, I cannot help it. We have to work with the whole society. There should be a lot of bottom-up activities, because the people themselves should start hating the hatred. And the people themselves should start hating the manipulation. And that's why also what we did with GDPR, this was the start of the journey. And I think it was Brittin who said it, that with GDPR we came with something which now looks like a global standard. But we wanted the people to be subjects on internet, not just objects. We wanted the people to be self-confident and well-informed individuals rather than easy to manipulate crowd. Mm-hmm. And this is what we try to do, and this is what we cannot achieve by legislation and not from Brussels, but it has to be, as I said at the beginning, whole of society effort. And here I am optimistic because I see that something is happening already now.
And we will talk more about what is happening during the course of this day. I want to thank you all very much for taking the time to come together and discuss this very important issue. Věra Jourová, Annelies Wairimu, Nderitu, Hilde Hardeman, Berger, Brittin, and Marcus Reinisch, thank you so much. And well, all the best for future conferences and get-togethers and talks, hopefully also face-to-face and not just via screens, however wonderful it is that it is possible at all, especially during this 1.5 years where we were confronted with these exceptional circumstances. So thank you again. And to you out there, dear audience, watching this, listening to us, joining in with your questions and suggestions, bear with us. We'll be back in about a minute with the next panel session, and that is on social media for peace, a project by UNESCO funded by the EU. We'll discuss that in detail in a moment. See you.